Hello everyone, welcome to this special bonus episode of The Evolution of Horror. This week sees the release of the brand new Rob Savage film. He has adapted the Stephen King short story The Boogeyman to the big screen. Rob Savage, of course, the man who brought us Host, the ultimate lockdown horror, followed by the controversial Dashcam. So both kind of interesting, small budget British found footage movies. And he's now taking on a big studio budget film, Stephen King. This is Disney, made in the US. So a real kind of breakthrough into the mainstream for Rob. So if you want to hear our full thoughts on The Boogeyman and what we actually thought of the movie, you can hear our review on Fresh Blood on Patreon in the next couple of weeks. But what you're about to hear right now is my interview with Rob Savage about making the film. We try and keep this as spoiler-free as possible. We don't give away any big plot twists or reveals. We just talk about a few of the minor plot points more broadly. So please enjoy my discussion with Rob Savage on all things Boogeyman.
Katie, there's something in my room. You believe me, don't you?
There's no such thing as monsters. You need to grow up. I'm serious, Sawyer. I need to be alone.
Rob Savage, hello.
Hello.
Hello. This is so lovely to. I was just saying before we started recording, but I feel like I've never really seen you in three dimensions. We're always talking over Zoom or something similar. How has this been for you? This kind of press tour so far?
It's been good. It's been a bit punishing, but in a fun way. And it's nice to sit down with another human being. I'm doing a lot of this over Zoom, which as we all know, can be a little deadening. So it's nice to be sitting in a physical space with you. So
tell me, how did this project kind of begin for you? Tell us a little bit about the origins of this one.
It was right after Host. Straight after Host, I was offered every single script under the sun, every single horror script at least, and almost all of them were terrible. And then this one came along and it wasn't terrible, and it was Stephen King. And the title as well felt, I remembered the short story. I'd read the short story when I was younger, and it terrified me, along with all the short stories from Night Shift and Skeleton Crew and all those. I was devouring all those short story collections, and I felt like there was something exciting about taking on a movie called The Boogeyman after there having been 700, bad Boogeyman movies.
Yes.
To try and do the definitive take on this character with the help of Stephen King and such great producing partners in 21 Laps, who did Stranger Things and Arrival, and it just was a great team of people. Beck and Woods, who did A Quiet Place, had written the draft that I read, and so there was already a script which is very different from what ended up on screen. They'd taken it in a different direction, but they'd already kind of come up with this great idea of building out the short story, which is just like this, basically two people in a room talking.
Right.
They'd found a way to build that out into something that was really exciting, and I just kind of knew that I could do something really cool with it. So I jumped on board and was developing that while I was shooting Dashcam, and then as soon as Dashcam finished, this got the green light and I was away.
Wow, incredible. And what was it like, especially after Host and Dashcam, going into a big studio production like this? Obviously, you're not doing found footage this time around and everything. Tell us a little bit about the experience of just making this film.
It was, after doing Host and Dashcam, I felt like I'd made a stamp in the found footage genre, and this was really, felt like I had to prove myself again, because it had been a long while since, it'd been 3 years since I'd shot something that wasn't on an iPhone.
Yeah.
Since I'd been on a proper set, surrounded by all the different departments that you have on a movie of this size. I'd been working in TV before Host, and that felt similar, but not quite on the same scale as this, and certainly it had been a while. So I was just afraid that I wouldn't kick into gear and I wouldn't remember how this worked. But so I made sure to plan this movie within an inch of its life. I storyboarded the whole thing. I just wanted to make it as well thought out as possible, and then it was one of those things where as soon as you get into the kind of inner circle of of cast and camera, and you've got this script you've got to execute. It all kind of feels the same, whether you're doing it with an iPhone, you're doing it with an Arri Alexa. It's you're still just trying to give the audience a certain experience, and you're working with a team of incredibly talented collaborators to try and make something come together. And I was able to slot back into it, thankfully.
I loved some of the kind of visuals of this movie as well. Again, moving away from that found footage and, some of these shot compositions you've achieved, and there's a lot of kind of interesting sort of moving the camera upside down and that kind of thing. Tell me a little bit about some of your sort of visual decisions in making this film.
Well, I wanted every single shot in this movie to feel very purposeful. I wanted that, with found footage, everything is meant to feel accidental. It's meant to feel like you've just discovered something and you're not meant to be looking at it. Whereas in this movie, I wanted the audience to feel that every single shot, they were looking exactly where I was telling them to look, and that every single scene, there was a purpose and a point of view behind it. I always feel like when I watch a movie, in the last interview I was talking about A Quiet Place, and Quiet Place is a great example of this, where you can feel Krasinski guiding you through that movie really confidently, and it's just a joy to watch because you know that you're in the hands of somebody who knows what they're doing. And this, using a new toolbox of cinematic tricks, I wanted the audience to have that same feeling, that every single scene, I had them and I was taking them through, these set pieces with confidence and with style, and now with the budget as well, which is another difference between this and the other two movies, which were made for pennies. Yeah, I could do a lot of what I had in my head, and rather than building the movies back to front like Host and Dashcam, where it was like literally, what have we got for free? What can we put in this? In Host, it was like, what have you got in your house that can be scary? And then you build the movie from there. This was the opposite. This was let's plan it, let's storyboard it, and then we literally built the houses to my storyboard. So the scares were, the shots were as scribbled by me in my notebook, and that level of control was amazing and allowed me to pull off some scares that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise. And then it was just about making sure that it didn't become too clinical, and that same kind of like level of improvisation and spontaneity that I think makes Host and Dashcam such special movies. Like, we could bring that into this and give it a bit of that personality and flavour.
That's awesome. So the house itself and everything, was that all a set?
All a set, both of them.
Amazing.
Both
Fantastic.
houses, yeah.
So that was kind of all sort of dreamt up in your head when you were storyboarding it and everything, in terms of the way that house would look and the production design.
I mean, a lot of it comes from Jeremy Woodward, our amazing production designer, but I would storyboard it, and I just know that we needed, that she's going to be wandering towards a strange sound, and so we need some steps that lead up to a creepy attic, so the audience thinks you're going up there, and then she's going to step in the blood, and it's, get these little bits of misdirection. And I spoke about this last time I was on the podcast, about how much I love the movie The Innocents, which is probably the best horror movie ever made. And I had a lot of stills from that I would pin on my wall, because that's a movie that uses negative space in such a beautiful way that really it gives you so many places to look and imagine ghosts might pop up in these dark areas of the frame, and I wanted to get that feeling across. And so Jeremy would kind of build that into the space, but he was the one who kind of made it make sense. Like, he had to actually build the thing.
It's amazing, actually. Yeah, that definitely struck me as watching it, like in terms of the control of the light in the frame as well, right? Like, there's so much that is done with darkness and maybe just about seeing something, but maybe not, right?
Yes.
And it must have been really awesome to kind of play with that in terms of creating scares from it.
Yeah, and that's another great thing about doing it all on set, is it's controllable. You've got all that on a switchboard, and you can dial things up and down and left and right and all that kind of stuff.
How? Because I mean, you've proven very good across 3 films at creating kind of these scares as well. And, I think we've spoken before about, I know you're a fan of movies like Lake Mungo and that kind of thing, and that kind of sustained, eerie kind of vibe versus the kind of big cathartic jump scare, I suppose. And obviously you've got both going on in here. Like, again, like what were you thinking in terms of what kind of scares you wanted to create for this film?
It was interesting because I wanted to make sure that every single scare felt different, and it wasn't just they weren't all coming from the same direction and with the same rhythm. And so what I did is I got every scare and I wrote it on a different coloured card for different kinds of scares.
Cool.
Like a dread scare or a hide and seek scare or a jump scare. And I put them all on the wall, and me and my team kind of looked at them and we were like, okay, well, there's a lot of red, there's a lot of this kind of scare, let's see if we can mix things up. And I wanted to make sure that you didn't quite know where the next scare was going to come from. You didn't know when you were safe. You certainly didn't know. It's not like one of these horror movies where I can check my phone now because it's going to be 5 minutes of talking. The sun's going to go down, then there's going to be the scare scene. I wanted there to be daytime scares and dream sequence scares and then also scares that don't quite materialize, or scares where you hold on people's reactions on their faces rather than seeing the horror. So you play these different kind of modes of storytelling, and hopefully the audience then feels on edge the whole time, and it helps build that feeling of sustained dread that you're talking about, because they don't quite know where you're going to get them next. There's
a kind of emotional heft to this movie too, actually, isn't there? It's not just this kind of fun roller coaster ride. It is that, but there is also this there's quite a sadness at the centre of this. Yeah. Again, how was that for you, kind of, I guess, balancing those tones throughout this story?
That was really the pitch, and that was what I thought I could bring to it. That was the pitch on where I would develop the movie. When I came on board, I said, I want this movie to be Ordinary People, the Robert Redford movie, meets Poltergeist.
Amazing.
So it's like, I want this to be fun, and I want people to be able to go to the cinema and tell their friends about it, and it's going to be 90 minutes. And it's not Hereditary.
No.
It's more The Conjuring than Hereditary. But when we're doing those scenes of where the characters are dealing with this loss they've gone through, I wanted that to feel authentic and grounded, and I wanted the performances to be world class, and I wanted the dialogue to feel real and understated. And I think I wanted to do both. I wanted it to be classy. I wanted it to be classy and trashy all at once.
Yeah, and I think what's great as well is that you do. Obviously there is a kind of metaphor here for what this monster is and what this family are going through, but also it's still very much a monster in the story, if you know what I mean.
It's definitely a monster. It's not a metaphor.
This being like, oh, it was all a metaphor.
It's not the Babadook.
Exactly.
It ends. It's like, no, it's just a metaphor. This is a monster, and it will bite your head off.
Yes.
But it's also, it's like, and look, this isn't a horror movie that's trying to reinvent the wheel. It's literally the boogeyman that lives under your bed. It's the oldest, tropiest horror villain that we're trying to make fresh and scary again in new ways. But the horror movies that deal with grief and trauma are also, there's been a lot of horror movies that play in this territory. And the thing that I was drawn to, the thing that I thought the short story was touching on really beautifully and that we wanted to build on, is this idea of communicating. It's not really about the creature isn't grief, the creature isn't trauma, the creature is like what happens when you don't speak to grief and trauma.
Yeah.
And actually, it's one of the main characters is a therapist. This is a movie about finding that common ground, talking to people and leaning on other people when you're going through hard, dark times. And we meet this family who aren't finding it easy to communicate their grief. They're all grieving, and every single one of them is pushing that down and letting it fester unspoken.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of unspoken darkness which is a perfect breeding ground for this creature. So this creature represents everything that happens when you look away from from your inner darkness and let it sit there and turn into something monstrous.
That's amazing. And tell me about the by the way, Boogeyman, right? This is what I found funny talking to as a Brit, because I've spoken to a lot of British people that go, is it Boogeyman? Is it Boogeyman? But it's Boogeyman, right?
Boogeyman. Yeah. It's a foreign film.
Yeah, exactly. Tell me, because you've mentioned already there have been countless kind of films that have dealt with, but there has even been another film called The Boogeyman, right?
There's been a bunch of films. Actually, Vinegar Syndrome cheekily have released their new disc, The Boogeyman, the same week that we're releasing The Boogeyman.
Of course they have. Savvy.
Yeah.
I love it.
God love them.
Yeah, it's funny, but I guess The Boogeyman is a term that can be sort of anything, right? I mean, even in Halloween, they call Michael Myers the Boogeyman, don't they? So, this Boogeyman particularly, tell me about how you approached kind of creating the creature, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, no, I think that was that was part of the allure of this movie, is like trying to come up with the definitive boogeyman, but also one that allowed room for other people's interpretations. Like, everyone's got their own idea of what this thing is. It's the Jaws alien. It's that approach to the monster where you don't really see very much of it. And in fact, we were always measuring the screen time of our monster against Bruce the Shark and the alien from Alien.
Nice.
And actually, there's a second less of our boogeyman than there is of the shark in Jaws, and a second and a half less than the alien in Alien.
Amazing.
So we really tried to keep it minimal. But in terms of the design, obviously at the end of the movie, you're going to see the creature. This is a big Disney horror movie. You've got to fight the creature at the end. We had this idea, the brief that I gave to the design team was basically that this creature is called the Boogeyman by kids. That's the word that they put to this thing, but it's not the Boogeyman. This is some ancient, unnamed evil that has existed as long as there's been darkness out in the world. And I kind of told the designers to imagine this creature lurking at the edge of a cave as a bunch of cavemen huddle around a fire. It's got to feel like it's primordial and ancient and could exist. It existed there in the beginning of time in the same way it exists now in your in your closet, and it also so it was that like three kind of like tenets of for this creature. It was that you had to be able to draw it in quickly with a crayon like a kid would, and have it make sense as a kid's drawing, and then 3. Because this creature is kind of the spectre of death, it's the unspoken. It's, you speak about Lake Mungo. It's like it's that idea of the confrontation of death. So the other brief was like, it can't be some weird alien design that looks like it came off, fell down from Venus. It's got to feel like you're looking at something that's recognizably human, just twisted and contorted. So it's like, you've got to basically imagine that you can put this creature together using human body parts. Yeah. You can burn them, you can char them, you can chop them up, you can stick them together in any way, but it's got to feel like you're looking at something that was once human. And then we came up with this idea in the third act, not to spoil it, but when you see the creature, you see him, it's the Boogeyman, and then he reveals this kind of hidden aspect of himself, this kind of weird body horror, Lovecraftian inner dimension that that hopefully makes audiences leave the cinema thinking that they kind of only just scratched the surface of what this creature is or could be, which also harks back to the short story, which had a kind of like a reveal of something that lurks beneath the skin.
Did you have anything physical on set to for this monster, or was it all sort of done in post and visual effects?
It was all done in VFX, but I had a 3D printed creature head on a stick.
Amazing.
Like Staphne from Evil Dead Rise.
Yeah.
And I would run after people with this head and make monster noises.
Nice.
And then that would be replaced. And we had a guy in a kind of like suit with spots on to do some of the wrestling stuff, the more involved,
right, of course,
action where you needed to feel him interacting with the space and the actors.
Yeah, of course. So how was it for the actors? I mean, Sophie Thatcher gives an incredible performance, right? Tell me a little bit about directing this cast, particularly this core 3.
Yeah, well, it was tough in those scenes, like the finale of the movie, where they're interacting predominantly with this CG creature that isn't there. Yeah, was a huge challenge. I mean, I'd never done something as involved on a VFX level as that. I was having to make sure that I was collecting all the bits that I needed, but also that the cast were reacting in a way that felt like there was a literal creature jumping for their jugular. And they and hats off to them. We did that last, so I'd kind of built up enough trust that they really went for it in those moments, even though it felt ridiculous on the day. Yeah. And one of the good things as well, and you'll appreciate this. So the first time I met Sophie Thatcher was on a Zoom. I hadn't even really seen Yellow Jackets. I'd seen a bit, and I'd seen Prospect, and I thought she was great, but I didn't know very much about her. And I jumped on the Zoom call, and I had a Possession T-shirt on. Nice. The first thing she said is she pointed and she was like, "I fucking love Possession."
Amazing.
And then we just chatted, and then we were chatting, and she was like, "The horror movie I've seen the most is Necromantic 2."
Oh wow!
And I was like, "Oh, I'm going to cast you. This is great.
That's what a legend.
Perfect." And it was so it's like, having a shared frame of reference with any collaborator is so important, especially for Sophie, who was like, she's carrying this whole movie on her shoulders, giving this like Herculean performance of just like every single day she's turning up, she's being traumatized, she's putting her body through this incredible trauma.
Yeah.
But she's also having to do these like, she's having to like follow strange noises down a hallway with a a lit candle and all these kind of like horror beats. And I think if an actor doesn't quite understand the language of horror, like people like you and me do, those scenes are quite hard for them because they, you've got to know, like when you reach for a closet door handle, you've got to like hesitate for a second and then you open it. You can't just like open it straight away. There are just certain expectations that you've got to meet as a horror movie. And she totally understands the language of horror. She's a huge horror fan. She's like, so with those scenes, I was able to describe to her exactly what I wanted to achieve, and she was like. She was like a true collaborator on this movie. Every single day we were there together, like building this movie.
And then equally, you had a was it 9-year-old actress on set
Vivian.
playing her little sister? Tell me about that. Like, I always wonder that with horror movies that star children. How difficult is that to kind of for her to understand the heavy stuff she's dealing with as well in this film?
Well, She's 9, but she's not really 9. She's like 85.
Yeah.
She's like this incredibly old soul. She's one of the smartest, wisest, most brilliant actors I've ever worked with. Although I didn't know that at first. And so I started out by kind of like talking in a baby voice and patronizing her and trying to like, hold her hand through the scenes. And she just didn't need it. And she was very polite at first. And then like it just became clear that I could just talk to her like a normal actor. And she's been acting since she was 4 or 5 or 6 or something. She was in Bird Box when she was 6, and she's got her craft really honed. And at first with Sophie, I would do things like again with her permission, I would make loud noises and I would throw books on the floor and smash things and make like anytime we needed a jolt, I'd kind of try and give her something to react to because she was having to do so much of it. And I spoke to Vivian and her mum and was trying to do things like that, like make loud noises or try and trick little moments of fear out of her. And after a few days, she came to me and she's like, "Rob, I know you really love doing this and making loud noises and screaming monster noises at me, but she's like, I don't really need it. So you can save your voice." And I don't know what she did, but she would be able to close her eyes and just like summon this deep well of emotion, and tears would start streaming down her face, and she'd be able to get her breathing. She'd be able to trick her body into these places of anxiety and trauma, do the scene, and then you call cut and she'd just be a 9-year-old again. Wow. It's incredible.
Amazing. Have you watched the film yet with an audience? Like, have you?
I'm going to watch this movie with an audience tonight. I love this movie, and I love watching it with an audience. And all throughout in fact, when we were editing this movie, one of the things I asked the studio if I could do, and they were very kind to let me do it, was I had 8 weeks, or was it 6 weeks? 8 weeks of director's cut, which is my time with the movie, editing it before I have to show the studio. Yeah. And I asked if I could bring in 2 random strangers every single week to sit and watch the movie. Nice. Just so I could, cringe at their reactions and ask them what was scary and see what they were laughing at and all that kind of stuff. And so for 8 weeks, every week we'd bring 2 people in and show them the movie, and it would be awful, but it'd be really illuminating. We'd make changes the next week, and I think I'm going to do that in every single movie from now on, because it really helped me hone this movie down to something where every single scare, you can feel it when you watch it with a packed audience. It really works, and it's meant for a big screen. It's meant for a big audience. It's a big Friday night popcorn horror movie that's meant for as wide an audience as possible, and it's just a blast to sit in there and watch people squirm. That must be great, especially in comparison to, I guess, with Host, for example, where you initially, at least, you didn't get to experience that with an audience, right? Did you have that with Dashcam? I can't remember. Was it? Dashcam had a little theatrical. Dashcam is, Boogeyman is a very, very hard PG-13, but Dashcam is a very, very hard 18R. has a very different audience. And Dashcam is actually a blast to watch with an audience. I love watching that with a big crowd as much as possible. See, Dashcam doesn't really work very well when you watch it at home. Host works kind of both ways, but this, I think, is really designed. It's a roller coaster. It's meant to be viewed with a big audience on a big screen.
Definitely, and I think that we're really in a place right now, horror audiences, where they're hungry for those kind of fun, crowd-pleasing horror movies.
Evil Dead Rise was that.
Exactly, yeah, and even when you look at some of last year's biggest movies like The Black Phone and Smile, it feels like we're back in those fun roller coaster ride horror movies again. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, that communal experience is... the cynical part of me thinks that's maybe not long for this world, and we've got to hold on to movies that bring us together in that way. And watching a horror movie with 100 people who are on edge and like on the same ride as you, there's nothing like it. Yeah, absolutely. So what's next? Do you know? Is this going to get any sequel of any kind? Do you know? Well, if people go and see it and it makes enough money, which I really hope it does, we've got the best idea for a sequel.
Really?
A movie that I'm so excited about. It's one of those movies, like even if you took the Boogeyman out of it and it wasn't a sequel, it would be a horror movie I'd be so excited to make. It's got such a great, unusual concept for a follow-up. So I hope this movie is a big hit so I get to make that, because that would be a fun one to make and to watch with an audience as well.
Amazing. Yeah, because it feels like we haven't had a lot of, really kind of iconic new movie monsters in a while too, right? In the way that you still talk about Freddy or Jason or Chucky or something like that,
Well, Pennywise was probably the last one.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, I know that does count, because even though Tim Curry is iconic, I think, who
Bill Skarsgård.
Bill Skarsgård played him and made him an iconic character.
Yeah.
But it's been a while.
Yeah.
And it was the clan from Terrifier is pretty...
That's true.
In an indie space is probably...
That really found an audience. And the Babadook, in a weird way, as well, has kind of become sort of... Almost people are aware of that character, and even if they haven't seen the film, it's a strange one, isn't it? Yeah.
Completely. But it's few and far between.
Yeah. And actually, finally, let me just ask you something I forgot to ask about, was Stephen King, of course, right? So this must be such a scary thing as well, because we've all heard these stories about, Stephen King publicly hating movies like Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, right? And that kind of thing. Yes. How was that for you, and how involved was Stephen in this whole process?
He'd read the script and he liked the script going in. And he was really supportive. He thought that it was, a good, worthy adaptation of the short story on paper. So I knew that... it was mine to mess up as we went into the shoot. And then we had a couple of great test screenings and felt like after the second one, which just was... It was one of those screenings you only get a few times in your career where just everything worked and you felt like the audience was with the movie the whole time.
Amazing.
And it felt like after that was the time to show Stephen before we locked the movie. So we rented out his favourite cinema in Maine, and him and his nephew went to see it. And I was finishing the movie, so I wasn't able to go and meet him. I've only been talking to him virtually so far. But we had somebody from the studio sat in the back row who was basically like live tweeting or live texting his responses. So every scare he was texting me like, "Stephen jumped."
Yes.
Steve laughed at that joke, and I was getting this live update, and then. Finally, he came out of the movie and he sent this like long response to us in the edit room, saying how much he loved the movie, how terrifying he thought it was, and he shouted out to all the different departments and the actors, and really he clearly put a lot of thought into it. And then the next day, I got an email in my inbox saying from Steve King. And he said, "Rob, I'm still thinking about your movie," and he listed a whole other bunch of things that he really, that he really enjoyed, and it really stuck with him. And the best thing is he's been tweeting about it, which has been great, but he's also been recommending it to people. I got a call the other day, and it was he told Andy Muschietti, who did the It movies, he'd called him up specially to tell him how much he'd love the Boogeyman and that Andy should go and watch it.
Wow.
Which is amazing.
Incredible.
That he's even behind closed doors, he's he's making all the right connections and saying all the right things. And he's been such a huge help in getting this film out there. The last thing that he said in the essay that he wrote about the movie was this needs to go on the big screen. And this was back when this movie was going to be for Hulu and go streaming. And of course, we were talking about it, but when Stephen King weighs in, people really listen.
That's amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much, Rob.
Thanks so much. That was fun.
Thank you. And there we go. That's it for my interview with Rob Savage on The Boogeyman. The Boogeyman is out in cinemas in the UK and I think everywhere else right now. So go and check it out if you want a fun, scary roller coaster ride to watch with an audience. But if you want to hear more of our thoughts on the film, we will be reviewing it on the next edition of Fresh Blood, which is our monthly review strand where we cover all new releases, and that's available for $5 patrons. Patreon.com/evolution of horror. Thank you so much for listening and join us again soon for another episode of The Evolution of Horror.